This is the second portion of our third lesson, and we'll talk now about the architecture of a computer. In general, it's the same architecture for all computers, and we'll mention, if we have time at the end, what type of computers exist, and a little bit about the past and present. So let's start with architecture and look at how a computer is built in general, and at a later lesson we'll see in particular all the components that are inside the computer. So for now we'll start with the most basic components, and I will draw the components, and of course it's not the way they look in reality, but it's just a schema of how things look. So let's start with a unit that's called input. Input is any device that can enter data into the computer, and that's the way we as humans interact with a computer. For example, a keyboard is an input device. A mouse is an input device. Everything that's bringing data or something into the computer from the outside world is considered input. On the other side of input, there is something that's called output. And output is something that the computer generates for us. Examples for output, as you see on the screen, as I'm writing those words, this is an output device, the screen, because it gets generated by the computer. The computer paints the screen every time I write a letter. It paints that letter on the screen, and that shows us what's going on. And this is an output that we expect now. Another type of output, for example, is a printer. A printer is an output device because the computer generates some material and it prints it into a paper. So the printer is considered an output device. Now, the brain of the computer, or whatever is managing every resource that the computer has, I'll put here in between the input and output. And generally speaking, this component is called, for the most part, it's called CPU, which stands for Central Processing Unit. Sometimes it's called, in a shorter way, it's called a processor, and sometimes it's even called a chip. So if somebody asks you what kind of processor you have, what kind of chip you have, and you know what you have, you can say I have a dual core such and such. But what the CPU is, it's a computer chip, electronic chip, that can do a lot of calculations in a very short amount of time. So normally we can say that the CPU is sort of the manager or the central control of everything that's going on in the computer, and of course it does manage the input and output. And later on we'll see that it doesn't manage it directly but indirectly. But anyway, for now let's just say that the CPU is usually the most important and the most expensive piece of the computer, and we're missing one part and that part is usually drawn as a long sheet over here, and this is called the memory of the computer, or sometimes it's called the RAM. RAM stands for random access memory, and we'll learn why it's called random access memory, but for now let's just say this is the memory, and the memory can store all sort of things, and usually what it stores is data and programs. And the CPU, of course, does manage the memory as well. In fact, what the CPU knows to do, the CPU knows to go over the memory, and if it's a program, it knows how to execute those commands that are part of the program, and it creates the CPU. When it gets a piece of output, it routes it to the output device depending on what the output is. When it gets some input, it knows where to place it in memory, and we'll see all those things later on. But for now, let's just say this is the general architecture of every computer, and there are several types of computers, and whatever you know are normally called personal computers or PCs, because those are computers that are for usage by an individual, one person, and it's usually not a very expensive computer in terms of comparing it to a computer that's used in a corporation. So PC is the most visible computer that you can see, and even within PC you have desktops, you have laptops, but they're all called personal computers. And there's two other types of computers. The next level up is called a mini computer. It's not used that much, but they used it in the past. Mini computer was a computer that could be used by several people, a group of people. I would say between 10 and 100 people could use the same computer, and the way they use it is they each have a terminal that's connected to a central computer, and they get services by the computer. In other words, the computer is being shared by different people, and each person sits on a workstation. The workstation is generally a keyboard, a mouse, and a screen, and they all connect to the mini computer, and they get the computer services. The next level up is called a mainframe computer. Mainframe is a large computer, and it usually is used in big banks or big corporations, government. And the mainframe is a computer that can serve hundreds to thousands of people, and the same principle as the mini. It's one computer that's connected to many workstations, and on each workstation you can have a person working and getting services from the same computer, and this is called a mainframe computer. At a later stage we'll concentrate on what the mainframe has that the mini doesn't have or the PC doesn't have, but this is for now just a general idea of what the computer looks like, and this architecture is also true for the other types of computers. And with this, we'll end this portion of the lesson, and I'll stop the recording right now.